morning and welcome to Saturday Report. I'm BrawLHuB. Thanks for joining us. We've got a very busy show this morning. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and political analyst Mark Halperin, legal legend Alan Dershowitz will join us on the fight ahead for the Trump campaign. Plus, we'll get a live look at today's March for Trump in D.C. But first, let's check in with Kayla Ayers at the NEWSMAX News Desk for the latest headlines. Kayla, what do you have?
Hey, Carl. Good morning to you. Well, President Trump has tapped his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to take over his 2020 election legal fight. This comes after a series of legal setbacks in swing states on Friday. Since Election Day, Giuliani has been a public face of the president's legal challenges. Now he's reportedly in charge of the campaign's more than 24 lawsuits. 16 federal prosecutors are urging Attorney General William Barr to retract a recent memo that directed investigators to pursue allegations of voting irregularities prior to the certification of election results. The memo was the catalyst for the resignation of the leader of the election crimes branch. In a letter, a bipartisan coalition of 16 prosecutors wrote that Barr's memo was, quote, not based on fact, and that in the districts that they monitored, they had found no evidence of substantial voting irregularities. All right, here's a light story out of France. An elementary school is asking parents to not throw tardy students over the school fence. The school in Avignon put signs up outside of its gate with a cartoon of a parent tossing a small child into the air and text asking parents to instead wait for the gates to open. The principal says while there were only a few scattered incidents, some parents have in fact resorted to doing this. And Carl, I'm happy to report that they said there have been no injuries in those incidents. Oh,
I just saw the iconic person throwing their child over a fence. That's a real thing?
Apparently it is. You know, I guess parents just a couple minutes late want to get that kid in school. So
just maybe try the doorbell next time. I don't know. Thanks, Kayla. We appreciate it. All right, Washington, D.C. is planning to host a March for Trump rally today. National correspondent Logan Raddick is standing by with a preview. Logan?
Hey, Carl, several groups have events today here in Washington, D.C., and they're all converging into one large March for Trump event. It all starts at noon, a couple blocks east from the White House at Freedom Plaza on Pennsylvania Avenue, and will continue all the way up to the Supreme Court. And organizers include the Million MAGA March, Women for Trump, and many other groups. And one of the speakers today is Trump appointee Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who's urging the president to show up.
So one of the other things we discussed in the call is I said he needs to go out to the rallies, and I told him I'm going to be speaking at the March for Trump Day. I had a woman calling who said 6 of us are getting on a plane now from California to come to D.C. for the March for Trump.
Now, thousands of people started arriving here in Washington yesterday, and there are some concerns about clashes between the Trump supporters and counter-protesters. But Mayor Muriel Bowser insists that the city will do all it can to keep people safe.
We are preparing to make sure that those events happen safely.
So you're concerned about, I don't know, violence or whatever with these groups coming to town?
We're concerned about making sure that we have safe First Amendment demonstrations.
And one of the speakers at today's event is American Conservative Union Chair Matt Schlapp, and he says that he thinks Trump supporters will be peaceful this afternoon.
Conservatives are, by and large, just happy people. Here they're in this terrible election where all this fraud occurred. I've been a part of the teams that have helped uncover thousands and thousands of hard evidence on illegal voting, and they're still hoping for a miracle. They're hoping to thread the needle. And if nothing else, they want to show the left and the socialists that they can't steal our country.
And if you can't make it to D.C. for today's event, there are dozens of events occurring across the country, including in battleground state capitals like Phoenix, Arizona, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Madison, Wisconsin. Carl.
Thanks, Logan. Well, we got great news this week about the coronavirus vaccine. Pfizer announced its vaccine is 90% effective. Then President Trump announced on Friday that the White House Operation Warp Speed could make another vaccine widely available by April. Let's bring in Dr. Jonathan Baugh to discuss. He's an emergency medicine physician. He's also the Chief Medical Officer for Remote Health Solutions. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I want to know personally, beyond the news, but I want to bring it to everybody here. What do we know about this Pfizer vaccine? And 90% is a pretty bold statement to be successful.
Yeah, those are really good numbers for us to be able to look at. We know that the effectiveness of 90% will help us to reach that herd immunity. What we don't know right now is we don't know how long that effectiveness is good for. We don't know how long those antibodies will be built up within our system. And there is some talk about having to do some booster shots along the way with that. But hopefully, if we do that, if we do some staged booster shots, if we need to, as we deploy this across the population of America, then we can reach that herd immunity, which is so important for us to be able to really sort of get everything back into a normal manner again.
Right. Well, you brought up the fact that the immunities and the antibodies may not last. Now, this has been a question by a lot of people. Some people have previously believed that, well, if you get it, you've got it, and you've got the antibodies, you can move on. However, this may not be the case. What is the science behind that?
Well, there's a couple of things to be able to look at. One, we know that coronaviruses in particular that we've seen in different coronaviruses over the past several decades, it's been hard for us to be able to gain a true immunity against them long term, and that's because they have the ability to be able to change and mutate slightly, which stops us from having a long-term immunity. Right. And we know that we've also been seeing some, but not a huge number of reoccurrences of reinfections in individuals around the world, but some in our country as well. But those numbers aren't really very big. Right. And so there's a lot that we still have to learn. There's a lot of data that we're going to be gaining through the application of this vaccine. We're going to be figuring that out. How long do these antibodies really last? We're finally getting into a period where we're 11 months into the arrival of this COVID-19 in China, and then as it's moved across the world, we've got more and more months that we've been able to study, and we're going to gain a lot more data about how long do those antibodies actually last in our system and how effective are they for the general population. Right.
Now, so President Trump has talked about Operation Warp Speed success, which by all accounts it has been. I mean, to deliver a vaccine that's been tested and tried and successful in this short of time. He talked about getting another one by April, but what are some of the challenges ahead he sees both in medically and politically?
Yeah, so one of the things I'll mention too is I know that early on in this I was but I really kept saying I just don't see how we're going to be able to get a vaccine that fast through the process. But I really am actually very impressed by the fact that they were able to do it, and they've done it safely. They've done it through the right way. They have just kind of stacked some of those arms of the research and the trials upon each other, and invested some money into that process. And we have some great vaccines out there that are moving down that pathway, down that third step of the trials, and be able to get out into the public right now. Right. Some of the additional trials or problems that they're going to have is just the pure logistic deployment of this. That's on one side, and you ask about some of the political aspects of that too, and that is because the left has said, if it comes from a Trump administration, we're not going to take it. We question its effectiveness, and we question the validity of it. And I have to say that very much I've been involved in the process and talking to the right people, and there are not shortcuts that are being taken, and it has been very independent of administration. Instead, it's been science that has been pushing this forward in a very concrete way. And so I hope that people can look at that and say, hey, listen, this is good science, this is good data. I know right now New York has said, they're not taking the nationwide validation. Instead, they're going to validate on their own, and I think that is really sort of harmful to New York because they're putting in an additional step purely for political reasons.
I think that is just one of the most foolish political moves that he can make as a governor, Cuomo. But there is this powerful anti-vax movement in the U.S. And look, I'm not an anti-vax guy, but let's be honest, I'm not rushing in to get this vaccination until there's been some widespread public use of it. And I know a series of people that are also high risk that are in the same boat. So what are the chances that we'll get this, clear vaccine and then it'll be widely used right out the gate? And what number of people do you think won't take it?
Yeah, I haven't seen recent numbers, but within maybe a month or so ago, I was looking at some numbers then, and there was a pretty high number. I think about 25% of individuals said that they were not going to be taking the vaccine, sort of no matter what at that point. And then there's sort of staged from that as far as the individuals that are willing to be able to take it initially. I think it was about over 50%. I wish I could remember the numbers right now, but we are going to be dealing with that as far as being able to look out. And I think it's the responsibility of physicians and educators like myself to be able to get out and share the message of the fact that this has gone through the right steps. And just like every other vaccine, the influenza vaccine that we use every single year, and it is very, very helpful in this country in reducing deaths and mortality and morbidity. If we can educate the public on the fact that this has gone through that same process, then I think hopefully people will rely upon it a little bit more, because I do think that it's going to be helpful for us. Right. And one of the things that I really want us to be able to do as a country is be able to get open again, so that if it means that vaccine, if it means that we do certain things, if it means that we wear a mask, we have to have our economy open. We have to have our businesses going. We have to help the mom and pop shops, and we have to help Main Street. So I think if that's something that I could say to people, look at the benefits that it brings us, both health-wise and economic-wise, and talk to your professionals, talk to a doctor that you trust, talk to somebody that you work with or know down the street, and get their opinion. I think that they'll probably be positive about it, because there's good data out there.
Yeah, Dr. Jonathan Ball, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Folks, if you're struggling to keep up with this news cycle, or even understand it for that matter, don't feel bad. We are too, and we do this for a living. But real quick, Joe Biden is still not the official president-elect. No matter what the media claims, as far as I'm concerned, he's the lifeguard of the swamp, and I wouldn't elect him to be the president of my homeowners association. But now he wants to be the president for all Americans and says that we should unite and be civil. Okay, so two things are pretty clear right now. One, the millions on the left who took to the streets last week to celebrate Joe Biden without any real social distancing no longer believe coronavirus is an actual problem. And two, civility and unity only apply if Democrats think they're in charge. Roger that. AOC, on the other hand, has rushed in, and other Democrats are calling for lists to be made of Trump staffers and supporters. She wants to make sure that we're known and that we're forever branded as such. Well, AOC, put me at the top of that list, because I'm a proud supporter of DJT, and I will not be shamed into silence. Okay, so Joe Biden gives this great speech about healing, but where has this message of unity been for the last 4 years while Democratic-led cities literally burned to the ground? Our president was trashed to the press. Our police officers face new threats every single day. And don't forget this, while most major media outlets declared Joe Biden the winner, how many Republicans rioted, looted, screamed at cops? Give or take, 0. You would think the left would behave the same way, but no. Look, NEWSMAX hasn't called this race for a reason. There are still lawsuits that need to play out. The winning margin is less than 20,000 votes in some of these key states. Also, there's witnesses who are risking several years in jail by signing affidavits to raise questions about the process. Folks, the bedrock of our democracy is the right of we the people to have free and fair elections. Today, millions of Trump supporters have lost faith in that election process. There are allegations of fraud and a lack of transparency that still need to be litigated. And if the duty of every official is to ensure that that trust is rebuilt. Otherwise, our trust breaks down. To quote Barack Obama, democracy requires accountability, and accountability requires transparency. If half the country feels that it is being taken away, and I have seen this fighting overseas, you will get force. Nobody wants that. And those who say that are fools. I urge people to be patient on this matter as it makes its way through the court process. Keep in mind, a massive legal team has to gather evidence, they have to interview witnesses, and they have to file briefs in a fraction of the time it normally takes to go through courts. This is likely headed to the Supreme Court, where I bet my bottom dollar we'll get a fair shake. And here's why. With a waffling conservative justice in John Roberts, we all know, Clarence Thomas is actually the de facto leader of the conservative majority in the Supreme Court. Flashback. In 1991, Joe Biden chaired the Judiciary Committee, where he nearly destroyed the life and career of Clarence Thomas over unfounded sexual allegations of harassment. Almost 30 years later, Kamala Harris did the same thing to Brett Kavanaugh in front of his children. Accusations again. So when this lands on the Supreme Court's docket, you think for 1 minute they won't remember that? Trust me, folks. We'll get our day in court. and it will be a fair trial. Coming up, plenty more in the election battle and the legal war ahead. Stay tuned. Over the battle for the 2020 election, the Trump campaign dropped a big fight in Arizona, and there are new developments in Arizona. Let's bring in our panel to discuss. Scott Walker is a former governor of Wisconsin. We're also joined by best-selling author and political analyst Mark Halperin. You can catch his show Focus Group on NEWSMAX right here, Saturdays 3 p.m. Eastern and Sundays 2:30 p.m. Welcome both of you.
Thanks. Good morning.
So, Mark, I want to go to you first. We saw the Trump campaign drop one part of its lawsuit in Arizona. What is the latest here?
Well, look, the Trump campaign is going to have to turn around a lot of states based on the current counts. Some of the advisors to the president will tell you they don't see it right now, but they know that the results have not been certified. That gives them a little bit of time to see what they can do with various suits. They've dropped ones where judges have shown skepticism, Carl. They've dropped cases where they couldn't seem to come up with the right amount of evidence to have the process move forward. They've not gotten a case back to the Supreme Court, and I think that at times the campaign has held back, not wanting to go to the Supreme Court too early. I think now some strategists around the president would like to see a Supreme Court decision to try to build at least a little bit of momentum to turn around the states they need to turn around, Arizona, Georgia, and probably Pennsylvania, if they're going to turn this thing around overall.
Yeah. Now, Governor, one of the biggest things that people talk to me about is like, well, are they going to find enough votes that were fraudulent to overturn the election? And I've made the point to them, correct me if I'm wrong, I've made the point that we don't need to show enough votes to overturn the election. We need to show enough votes that were fraudulent or alleged to be fraudulent or whatever in order to have people say that this election is not safe and secure and fair. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got to be things where they can document it. One of the challenges we've had is people bring up things they've heard as opposed to things that they can actually prove. And that's what we need to have. For a judge to step in, they've got to see clear and present evidence of exactly that this, because what you have when you have a fraudulent vote is you're taking away from me and you and everyone else who voted legally in that area. And so in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia, we felt all along those were the key states, throw in Wisconsin, Arizona. But in each of these cases, they've got to have that kind of evidence, and they've got to be able to prove it in court.
Yeah. So, Mark, on this, look, I was a Navy SEAL for 9 years. Like, I went overseas and was willing to die for someone else's rights in Iraq to vote. And now I come back, and some people are saying, well, it's over. It's not a big deal. Like, let's get on with our lives. And I say, look, if one... And these are allegations still at this point. I haven't seen the court evidence, but if one dead person has voted, if one ballot has been fraudulent, that makes my vote was worth nothing. And there's a ton of soldiers that went over there and fought for this stuff so we could have this free and fair election. So, Mark, even if they find one ballot, 2 ballots, 3 ballots, is that enough to make the case that, hey, we need to seriously look at potentially even redoing an election in a certain state?
Well, Carl, look, we don't want fraud or wrongdoing or even errors that lead to people's votes effectively being canceled out. But that doesn't mean the election is going to be overturned. You're not going to see, even if you found widespread ballot harvesting or other things that were done improperly, you're not going to see a revote. You're not going to see a change in the trajectory of Joe Biden being certified as the winner. What could happen, and this has been the case, I think, really since 2 days after the election, what the president's team would need to turn this around, and it would now require lock in multiple states, is massive error, of machine error or human error that missorted large numbers of votes for the president that went to Joe Biden. That's happened in the past. If the president was depending on turning around one state or maybe 2, I think his team could be a bit more optimistic. But finding lots of fraud, finding lots of illegality even, is not going to produce a different result on its own. It's not going to allow the president to catch up. It's not going to cause a judge to say the state needs to revote.
Yeah, I mean, Governor, this is something that, we've all seen, and I sit at the dinner table with family, and we have this discussion is, this has never been dealt with before, so we don't know what to do. And that's true. I don't believe any court should turn around and just ominous dominus a new president. I think they should leave it back to the people. But when we talk about voter ID and voter accountability, is that going to be the new topic? Let's say there is a Joe Biden presidency. Do you think they're going to lift a finger to make sure that the next election is more accountable?
No, but the states should. And one of the best stories we saw on Election Day was every Republican legislative majority in the country was maintained. They actually added to it by adding both houses in the state of New Hampshire and adding in a Republican majority in the state of Alaska. what is incumbent on those state legislatures to do is to move forward with real election law reform. We owe it to see through this process in the presidential election, even if it doesn't change the outcome, because of the tens of millions of people, many of whom voted for the very first time. They need to see that their vote counts and there's a system that takes their vote seriously. But then going ahead, we need to make sure that every state in the nation, I was proud to sign a law that requires a photo ID to vote in Wisconsin. We need to make sure that every state not only has a photo ID, but has a series of checks and balances to make sure that signatures are valid, that identification can be verified, all those things so that we never have these sorts of questions, not just in a presidential, but any election in this society.
Well, you know, what's funny is, well, not funny, but in the primary, they had, 20 to 25% in most states of signatures rejected through these verification machines. But in the general, a lot of these states had less than 1% of the signatures rejected, which was that to me is enough to say, hey guys, we got to look deeper into this. And the next thing I want to talk about here, Mark, is Hicks, McGee, Porter Wright. Some of these law firms that are representing President Trump have now backed out of these lawsuits. They've asked co-counsel to take over. They've asked the judge to dismiss them from representation. And it's a new level of cancel culture we're seeing now, because what they've done is they've had people, left-wing operatives that are well-funded and well-organized go to other clients of those law firms, major clients that are their bread and butter. I mean, after all, it is a business, and said, we're going to put pressure on you if you don't put pressure on your law firm to drop President Trump. What do you think about that, Mark?
It's the latest example of mob rule, of something really ominous in our culture. Obviously, everyone in our society is entitled to legal representation. These law firms are not making a principled decision based on some new view of how they should decide what clients to take on. They're afraid of the mob. They're afraid of pressure, left-wing pressure in this case, from within their law firms and from other clients. And they're doing something that is not good for our society. Whether you think there was fraud in the election, whether you voted for the president or not, you should be troubled by the notion that someone, in this case the president or people associated with them, can't get and keep legal representation because these firms are making decisions based on fear rather than principle.
Yeah, fear in their bottom line. Mark Hopper and Governor Scott Walker, stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Up next, Joe Biden's moving ahead with his transition team. We'll look at the moves he's making next. Stay with us. Well, as the election battle continues to heat up, Joe Biden is moving ahead with his transition team. Let's bring back our panel. We're joined by former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, also with us, best-selling author and political analyst Mark Halperin. So, Governor, I want to go back to you first. Joe Biden, named longtime political operative Ron Klain to be his chief of staff. Is this more of the swamp, considering his background?
Oh, absolutely. And it was particularly audacious when he tweeted out that, saying that he was going to help deal with the pandemic. This is the same guy last year at Texas A&M who said it was only by pure chance that they were able to get out of the H1N1 situation without one of the largest mass casualty events in global history. So this is just more of the same. And really, it highlights why the U.S. Senate runoff for the 2 seats in Georgia is so important, not only for the obvious. They're going to change the rules. They're going to end the filibuster. They're going to pack the court. They're going to have 2 more states and 4 more likely Democrat senators. All that's clear. But it also will affect this cabinet. If there's a Democrat majority, he's going to put the most liberal members, swamp dwellers of the cabinet that you can imagine on his team.
Yeah. Well, Mark, the other thing, too, is he was looking at Rahm Emanuel, the architect of Obamacare, who said everybody should, he hopes he dies at 75 years old. Joe Biden's 78. So, we've seen, complete insanity of some of the selections, even more insane. Hillary Clinton is said to be considered to be Biden's UN ambassador. Is this a real thing, or is this just kind of like they're floating that out there to cover something else up in the media cycle?
Well, Carl, I think it's being floated out there as people think about the kind of people Joe Biden wants to surround himself with. I think, look, you can talk about Ron Klain's relationship to the swamp, to corporate interests, to lobbying, although he's not a lobbyist. But I think it's more about the establishment. Joe Biden is an establishment figure. He talked about Scranton versus Park Avenue, but if you look at his history, he is an establishment figure, as is Ron Klain. And I think one of the real divides that President Trump's candidacy 4 years ago and his support now, real divides in America, is between the establishment and a more populist sentiment. And I think that's where we'll see some of these Biden choices, like if you put Hillary Clinton in the government, you'd be seeing more of the same, more of the establishment.
Yeah, and Governor Susan Rice under consideration for Secretary of State. I mean, did people not forget about Benghazi and all the other scandals that she had when she trotted out on national television to lie to us?
Well, they're really oblivious to that. And that's kind of the bubble that when you talk about the establishment Mark just mentioned, living in that bubble, people think she was a high performer. They think Hillary Clinton is revered. These are the sorts of picks that work well in Washington, but I would argue not well in the rest of the country. But if it gets even worse, you start talking about Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. That really becomes the case if the Senate falls and the Republicans lose the majority. Katie bar the doors, because you're going to see the most radical of the radicals on the team, as well as folks who've made their careers in the swamp.
Yeah, well, so here's another thing, Mark, is you've got Bernie Sanders being suggested for labor secretary. Bernie Sanders, the guy who's never held a private sector job, almost ever, and he might be labor secretary. If we hold the Senate, hope we do, what is that something where the Senate can just, Mitch McConnell can just say, look, absolutely not, we're not approving this guy?
I think if the Republicans win, at least one of those Senate seats in Georgia, the governor's emphasizing it correctly. It's the biggest game in town right now in the whole country, and I don't mean game in a frivolous way. If Mitch McConnell has majority control, I think he will stop even maybe some of his current colleagues like a Bernie Sanders. And Joe Biden faces this dilemma now, which is typically you'd start to name cabinet members as a president-elect in November and December. If he's going to proceed, assuming that Mitch McConnell will be majority leader, he's going to make different choices. I don't think Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren will end up in this cabinet if Joe Biden takes up office on January 20th, regardless of the outcome in Georgia. But I do think you'll see changes in posture by necessity if the Democrats have the White House and Mitch McConnell stays the majority.
Now, Governor, could this be, just a negotiating tactic? He's floating Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, some of the very far radical leftists, and then all of a sudden, when they get disapproved, put in somebody who might have had a harder time, but hey, he can say, well, that's better than Elizabeth Warren.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of truth to that, particularly if Mitch McConnell's majority leader. But I don't think it's unheard of to think that Republicans, if they win, which I believe they will, but it'll be tough, both of the seats in Georgia, with McConnell in place as majority leader, I could actually see him holding out on any of the president's nominees for the cabinet and spending the next 4 years holding out on judicial appointments as well, realizing that's the most power they have in a government with a Democrat House and a Democrat president. That ends up being the case. And I think for most people in America, gridlock in Washington is actually a relatively good thing on most issues.
I never thought I'd hear anybody say that. But real quick, Governor, before we go, I want to get your take real quick on Wisconsin and the inside legal battle. What are you hearing over there?
Yeah, the bottom line, and I told this repeatedly to the legal team, mentioned again to the vice president yesterday, the canvass is being conducted right now county by county. It will be done on December 1st statewide. And that, as Mark alluded to before, that's the key. You've got to see if there was any errors. 9 years ago in a statewide ballot for Supreme Court, 14,000 votes were not properly reported on election night, even though they had been properly cast. And that changed the outcome of that state Supreme Court election. It would take something like that to make up the approximately 22,000 vote difference right now, but it could happen. And it's why they need to watch the canvass between now and December 1st.
All right, former Governor Scott Walker and Mark Halperin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl.
All right, remember, you can watch Mark Halperin's focus group here today at 3 p.m. Eastern or tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. right here on Newsmax TV. Straight ahead, legal legend Alan Dershowitz will join us with the inside word on the election battle and the courts. Keep it here. See you soon. Let's get inside the inside word on the election battle with legal legend Alan Dershowitz. He's a Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and author of Guilt by Accusation. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Fine, and you?
So there's probably nobody I'd rather hear from this morning on this than you, sir. So Pennsylvania's Secretary of State will not order a recount. She's refusing to order a recount because Biden's lead is greater than the 0.5% that Trump would, need to categorically do this under the law. But there's so many inconsistencies. Trump is making the case that he should have the recount. What's the next move for the Trump campaign?
Well, I think the next move is to challenge the ballots that came in after the close of Election Day. Those may very well be discounted by the Supreme Court. And if they are discounted, then you may get close enough to have the statutory requirement for recount. But let's look at the big picture. The big picture now is shifted. I do not believe that President Trump is now trying to get 270 electoral votes. I think he thinks that's out of the question. What he's trying to do is to deny Biden 270 votes by challenging in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Nevada, in Michigan, in Arizona. If he can keep the Biden count below 270, then the matter goes to the House of Representatives, where, of course, there is a Republican majority among the delegations of states, and you vote by state if it goes to the House. He's trying to follow the playbook of 3 elections of the 19th century, most particularly the election of 1824, which went to the House, and John Quincy Adams won it in the House, and then Andrew Jackson used the next 4 years to complain against the corrupt bargain. So I think he has 2 goals. One, to try to keep the Electoral College from giving 270 to Biden, and 2, if he loses, to announce possibly that he's going to run for re-election 4 years from now, and to campaign against what he regards as the corrupt bargain analogous to what happened in 1824 and 2 other times in the 19th century. I think that's the strategy that's now in operation.
So I know as a lawyer, you never give odds, you never give likelihoods or predictions, but what are the odds that he actually pulls this off?
You need a perfect storm for it to work. You need to get enough states, enough state attorneys general or state departments or whoever, secretaries of state or governors that are Republican and that legitimately refuse to certify the results because they're under challenge on the day that the Electoral College meets by statute. If on that day Biden doesn't have 270 votes, you don't get to vote 2 or 3 times on that. As far as the Constitution is concerned, it's 1 vote. And if the 1 vote doesn't give the leading candidate 270 electoral votes, then automatically it goes to the House of Representatives, where a whole new process takes over, and a process that clearly favors President Trump. So the odds are very, very heavily against it. And I'm not advocating it or suggesting it ought to be done. I'm simply giving you my objective, neutral, constitutional analysis of what could conceivably happen.
Yeah, and one of the things too, which I would like to point out to our viewers is, you give it, let's say you give it a 20, 30, or even a 10% chance of happening. Trump didn't get to where he was in life by being in the bottom 90%. I mean, he got there by being in the top 1% of driven people to get the thing done. So, my faith is that he's going to continue this fight. And look, if it turns out after the court battles roll out that he's not the guy, look, Joe Biden will then be the president and we'll go on with our lives and you and I will go back to work. But a judge in Michigan refused the request to delay the certification of the votes. Now, how does this complicate things for the Trump team?
Well, it does, because he requires both judges to support him in order to create the conditions under which the Secretary of State could refuse to certify. That's why it requires a perfect storm. It requires judges on his side, state judges, by the way, federal judges, secretaries of state, governors, and then the numbers to be below 270. If all of those coalesce together, then the Constitution provides for it going to the House of Representatives. Is it the best system? I can't imagine that it is the best system, but it's the system our framers adopted and the 12th Amendment and the 20th Amendment implemented in later years.
I mean, it's shocking that our founding fathers so long ago thought of just about everything. One of the things I want to talk to you about as a lawyer, we've seen the doxing of Trump team attorneys. Now, these people are going, we were talking about this with Governor Scott Walker and Mark Halpern earlier, where the well-funded and well-oiled left-wing machine has now called up the clients of major law firms, Hicks and McGee, Porter Wright, and places like that, saying, you need to put pressure on your law firm and tell them that they need to stop supporting Trump or you need to find a new law firm. And so what it's doing is it's affecting the bottom line of these law firms. And they've said, hey, okay, we're going to step aside. They've asked judges to remove them. Have you ever seen this type of doxing and this type of political pressure put on anything, especially our legal process?
Sure, during the McCarthy period when I was growing up. That's what happened. Any lawyer who defended anybody accused of communism, the law firms got pressure. If I had been in a law firm last January when I defended President Trump on the floor of the United States Senate, you can be sure that there would have been pressure on any law firm that I was in. Fortunately, I'm independent. I make up my own mind. Well, my wife makes up my mind most of the time.
I'm with you there, sir.
my own mind most of the time. And although my wife pressured me against doing it, I was able to resist that pressure and do it. But if you're a law firm, and the bottom line, it's a business, it's hard to resist those pressures. It's a terrible thing. It's happening all over the country, not only in this matter, but in other matters as well. And so I think we're seeing a return of a kind of McCarthyism where lawyers are blamed for their clients and where lawyers are pressured not to represent clients. Look, I commend the lawyers who are representing President Trump. They're doing their job. They have two jobs. Number one, to advocate, but number two, also to advise. And I'm sure some of them are giving the president advice. Some are saying to him, look, it's time to stop contesting this. Others are saying continue to contest it. That's the nature of our legal system, and we should be proud of our legal system and not attack those lawyers who are trying their best to defend a president and use all legal available resources. That's the right thing for lawyers to do, and it's wrong for others to put pressure on law firms to try to get them out of cases if the cases are legitimate cases.
Yeah, social pressure. I don't recall any widespread
pressure.
And I don't recall any widespread pressure on the attorneys for Harvey Weinstein or any of those guys.
No, there has been some. There has been some. Believe me, I experienced that. But there was no pressure when I was one of the lawyers in Bush versus Gore.
Right.
That pressure didn't exist. In fact, lawyers were praised on both sides of the case for bringing those cases, and that's the closest analogy. But today, anything you do that has anything to do with Trump involves pressure. I like to tease that I've lost 15 pounds since I defended President Trump on what I call the Trump diet, because nobody invites me to dinner anymore. And that's the kind of pressure that I think you get if you do anything in regard to President Trump.
Trust me, I am well aware, sir. Alan Dershowitz, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Still to come, we'll hear from Megyn Kelly on the legal fight ahead, because she was a prosecutor. You don't want to miss this.